I was like, why did this go to Cannes in 69? It's a 68 film. It did come out late in 68. It debuted at the London Film Festival in December. But also, the 68 Cannes, it got canceled halfway through because it was happening in May when all the protests were happening, and the critics and some filmmakers started rallying to cancel it in solidarity with the student protests and the general strike that was happening across France.
Oh wow!
So they only screened half the films. No awards got given out, and then the next year in 69 they come back. They start the directors fortnight. They start showing, having all these different sections where they show just a ton of films. But the If is one of the films in competition, and it wins the big prize after already having debuted and come out in the UK.
Irregular, but that makes sense that kind of thing would happen under those circumstances.
This is another one very, very much tied to the times, kind of like when we talked about In the Heat of the Night, and how even though that film was written before a lot of the civil rights stuff that was happening when it came out, it just happened to really resonate with the times. And you might want to go to the film experts for your opinions on topical films in the 60s, but some like it unauthorized. And I am Jay Brooks Young.
And I'm Zach Domes.
And yeah, we're talking about the British film If... by Lindsay Anderson.
If. Malcolm McDowell. A young McDowell, right?
His first film.
Oh, his first film. Wow.
Yeah, introducing. It's crazy that, this performance, the stuff that he does in this movie, I can't believe it's his first film,
That's insane. Young star, really, sort of a natural.
Yeah, those eyes, those big eyes.
Wow. Yeah, what'd you think of it? What'd you think of it overall?
Really interesting. I didn't know what it was about, what to expect, really. Mm-hmm. I just feel like I kept seeing it talked about very reverently by different critics and filmmakers and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting. It's I don't know, in some ways it's you start seeing films like this coming out in the late 60s and it feels like there's no precedent sometimes. It's I would expect this to have come out in 75 or something. Mm-hmm. So I was taken with it. It was very surprising. It was very new. I loved kind of how sort of realistic it was, at least through, most of the film. It starts to kind of go off the deep end towards the end. But I thought it was really well made and felt really kind of textural. The ending we'll get to, but that maybe doesn't hit very hard for me, and that might be just a consequence of watching this, decades later, and just media looks different. This isn't surprising at all now. I don't think anyone would be really scandalized by a film like this. But overall, I really appreciate it. It's really interesting, really unique film. But yeah, how did you find it?
Yeah, well, I guess because you mentioned how you felt towards the end and how it ends being not as surprising today as it may have been seeing it. I mean, one can think the same thing about something like Psycho. I feel like, how many times have I heard somebody, growing up, I would hear somebody say they had to watch Psycho for a film class or something like that, and they didn't think it was scary. So, you're going to have that. But for me, I felt like the film felt old. It felt like an older film. Definitely, like you said, it kind of felt more. If I didn't know the time it came out, I would have guessed earlier 70s, mid-70s. But it still felt very 70s, very late 60s. And so because of that, the ending did surprise me, because my mind had become, had fallen into the era and the time. So that ending did surprise me. I also think the ending was fitting for today, right? It's very kind of, at least in America, it was very foreshadowing of events to come and how things are today. But and I mean, that's part of it too, right? We're not surprised when we hear about like a shooting, let's say. We're not, something in the news, there's a school shooting, we're not surprised anymore because of how many there are. So that's part of it, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved it. I loved how it played kind of like a Linklater, like a Everybody Wants Some, or boys at a boarding school just being boys. I love those kind of films that really...
Yeah, sort of coming of age.
Yeah. There were a lot of those. I remember growing up in the 2000s and stuff. Like it's such a fun movie to watch.
Yeah, a lot of good sort of 2000s ones. Perks of Being a Wallflower, the Noah Baumbach Squid and the Whale is that sort of thing. We're kind of thinking about coming of age and boarding school movies, but also having just seen Cool Hand Luke, I'm thinking about prison movies too. They're kind of very similar. You're stuck in an institution, and it's all about how this little society forms within it, and the relationships that become really important between the fellow inmates or the fellow students.
Mm-hmm.
And they both kind of have this sort of episodic structure as well.
Right. Yeah, I love that. It's also like, I think one thing I was thinking of was like Dead Poets Society kind of thing. Lord of the Flies. That kind of just like vibe of, or that kind of like, uprising, the rebellion kind of percolating below. Yeah. Yeah, so that, but the structure of this one was wild. I mean, it never really produced a certain kind of narrative here. It was a lot of sort of slice of life, and it's broken into multiple chapters.
Yeah.
You're just getting a glimpse into various scenes of the school, and you're coming to know the characters through those scenes, but there's no real plot or kind of obvious narrative. Like you said, once it gets to the end, then there's a sort of shift at the end, but that doesn't come until after a good like hour and 15 or something of just various scenes.
Yeah, besides like Malcolm McDowell, I kind of didn't have a sense almost of who the main characters were,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we get the young boy in the opening who's like new to the school, and he kind of fades into the background, and then there's more emphasis on this like blonde boy who one of the whips really likes, who's kind of like obsessed with,
Right.
And we're kind of seeing what's going on with him a little bit, but then he feels like he factors in less. I forget if he's like helping them at the end or not, but yeah, it's just like it gives you this sense of kind of in that documentary way, and that's how Lindsay Anderson started making films, was making short documentaries, but this sense of just like, there are these other stories going on and we get glimpses of them, but we can't focus on all of them. They're not all going to have, complete narrative arcs.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that young blonde boy. I loved that moment when he's like watching the older guy on the beam.
Yeah.
Doing the gymnastics. And that's like slow-mo that he's doing it in.
Yeah.
Kind of a Jean Vigo sort of moment.
Yeah. Anderson acknowledged that he was really influenced by Zero for Conduct, and that's one of those moments that feels really directly inspired.
Mm-hmm.
And the blonde kid reminded me of the character in Zero for Conduct who everyone kind of treats like a girl, has like the longer hair.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I mean, that's a wonderful film, but it's interesting to see something at this moment in time that's like directly referencing homosexuality. You get the whips, and they're like in their dorm room, talking about their, I forget what they call them, the scum. They're like helper boys.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting that. You're getting this like nudity and stuff. Like it's pushing some boundaries in a way that feels, I don't know, provocative for the moment this is coming out.
Oh yeah, it's definitely provocative. The scene where McDowell's character goes to the restaurant when they get to go outside the school and he goes to that like cafe.
Yeah.
That's that girl.
Him and his friend, they like break out during the like rugby match or whatever, and they steal that motorcycle from the like motorcycle store, whatever you call it. Yeah, that whole sequence is crazy, but the cafe especially.
Yeah, like he tries to kiss her and then she slaps him and he walks away, goes to the jukebox, and then she goes back up to him, and then it cuts to this sort of playful, primal kind of reenactment of like they're I'm guessing they're supposed to be like animals on the savannah, because you have the African music in the background there, and then that even cuts further to them without their clothes on, sort of like wrestling with each other, all for the purpose of sort of just showing that as a symbolism of how we're still animals, and so when we are flirting or whatever, it's like we're still doing that from the point of being an animal, as human as we like to think we are. Sometimes the very basis of our existence is still primal to some degree.
Yeah, that felt emotional to me, because it's like this whole film is about the way the school is trying to box you in and sort of civilize you, and he just has this urge to let his instincts guide him and act like an animal, and sort of seeing that in what I imagine is sort of what's in his head at that moment. Him doing this with this girl. It felt really powerful, and it was like, I was like, wow, this is like probably the most like kind of powerful sort of image sequence of the film, I thought.
Yeah, it stands out. It really stands out. It's provocative, but it's also like, it's very, it's not just it's not provocative just for the sake of being provocative. It felt very, like you said, emotional and important. But what did you think of the African music? What was your thoughts on that? Just because we're talking about that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, because he puts it on the jukebox, and it's the same exact record that he has in his dorm that plays, which is apparently it's a Latin hymn that's recorded by like a Congolese choir. Yeah, it felt like, a lot of this feels like an adolescent, someone who doesn't really have a lot of perspective on the world, just these feelings of that things are unjust and you want to rebel against, the society around you. And he's just sort of grasping for these images that he puts on his walls, and for this like music that feels revolutionary or feels kind of countercultural, feels like it aligns with some of these like revolutionary figures that he's looking to, that he's cutting out of his magazines and stuff. Like it's appropriative, basically. It's this young white British kid who's never been to these places or doesn't really know anything about them, that just likes this, likes the aesthetic of it. That's a consequence of not having perspective, and you can't really fault a kid for reaching for something like that,
Right. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think there is a difference between like appropriation and appreciation, and if you have no other understanding or resource to draw from, and you hear something like this music and that makes you feel something, then yeah, that's appreciation in a kind of a beautiful way, right? And I was thinking of a time in my past when I was growing up and I didn't hear music necessarily that was like this, or it didn't feel right or something like that. And I had this opportunity to go to a world music festival, and it like changed me so much, because all the music there was like so live, many different types of musicians. I just remember feeling like that moment in my life opened me up to more of who I was, even, right? Like it felt like it connects you to a different source, it feels like. And so you are in this movie, you're presented with the hymns of the English church.
Yeah.
Presented with those hymns, which are very organ-based and very choral and arranged and formal. Everyone's dressed up and in a row and in a line. And they're kind of all sleeping. They're all falling asleep to it. Even the adults are snoozing away practically in the church. And then you hear this African music, this African version of a Latin hymn, as you said, and there's such a difference between those two things.
Yeah, it feels realistic, and this whole film, like, it feels very well informed, and it was written by this guy David Sherwin in his like early 20s, as he's wanting to get into like script writing. He thinks, write what you know, and he writes this based off of his time in a boarding school like this. So it all feels very, very real and relatable, I guess. There is a brief moment when he puts the first poster of the black man he's got like a big machine gun or something, and it's the first image that he puts on the wall, and the camera really lingers on it. And that moment felt a little dated. It felt like, the director feeling like, oh, this is going to sort of scandalize the audience, that, this young British boy is putting this on his wall, and we're really gonna focus on it for this couple of seconds. And I was that's not really, it doesn't come across as like that surprising or scandalizing.
Right. Yeah. You can get away with things if you just sort of show a thing, but you don't fully dwell. And at the same time, doing that sort of thing also gives this kind of feeling of like coolness about things that are sometimes considered, deep. So now I'm thinking of a moment when one of the kids says like he built a hut in the woods and he lived in it for like 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
Just to see if he could. And the way he describes it, it's like, some other director might like dwell on that moment and make more out of it. And in this case, the guy's like, yeah, I lived 2 weeks on my own in the woods, and I found out, I went inward and I discovered myself and blah, blah, blah. But like, it's no big deal. He's like, he just says it. And right after that, the McDowell character, he goes about whatever he was saying. And I like that. I like when dialogue can feel organic. Like, it really is true to teenagers to like they're not engaging with one another. They're sometimes just saying their own thing all at the same time.
Yeah. The film is really good about that and making this feel ordinary, making it feel like, like this is just going to happen under these circumstances where you're, being forced to conform so much. Like, these kids they're gonna act out, and they're gonna reach for these sort of rebellious things and make fun of their authorities and all these things. And it doesn't feel, extraordinary in any way. It just feels very normal until all these surreal elements come in at the end.
Mm-hmm. We're in the later you do know we're in the later 60s at least because of that. Like, at this point, culture has shifted. Like, we've now seen culture shift through this decade, so that people can kind of just throw these things into a film. And as as subversive as it is, it's also like to be expected almost by a certain crowd.
Yeah, now it's okay, and it's like not that surprising to depict the full sort of grossness or whatever of like adolescent boys. They're going to talk about sex. They're going to, do all these different things that, you wouldn't have seen in movies before.
I mean, if you think about it, like, people must have just been waiting and like dying for this sort of thing. Like, it's been showing up in music prior. There's been albums that have been pushing boundaries. Poetry, of course, had its boundary pushing at least 15 years prior to this, if not a decade. So, it's already in the culture. People are already doing crazy things, you have magazines, stuff like that. So people were just waiting. They're just like, what is going on with movies? Like,
yeah, exactly.
What's taking this so long to get good?
And we brought it up before, but The Graduate, the year prior being such a big hit, kind of wakes the studios up to what these young audiences want to see. And it's, I was very surprised that this was distributed by Paramount. You get the logo at the beginning. I couldn't find good information on how they got involved in the production, but a major studio is distributing this film about, massacring your boarding school. Like, it's a very different climate now, all of a sudden, in movies.
Incredible. When does Clockwork Orange come out?
71, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah, this casting Malcolm McDowell was inspired from seeing him in this film. I think McDowell later said that he talked to Anderson about how he should, try to play the Clockwork Orange role. And Anderson said, remember when you're going to get punished in the gymnasium, and as you walk in, you've got that like wry, smirk on your face. You should play it like that. And like it clicked for McDowell.
That's cool. That's really cool. I wonder, do you think Kubrick had any conversations with Anderson at all?
I don't know. I can imagine that. I mean,
because it seems like Kubrick's not only inspired by the character choice, but also a little bit of the rebellious quality in the film.
Yeah, he obviously saw the film to
right.
cast McDowell, and the Clockwork Orange novel feels like a similar sort of text to this. They probably met each other at some point. I think Kubrick was living in London by this time.
Right.
And filming 2001 and stuff.
Yeah, so any interesting scenes that you enjoyed, or like how did you feel overall about it, the way it moved through the different chapters and then comes to the great shift in the end there?
Well, we kind of touched on the whips, talking about their helper boys. That was surprising to me, and I didn't realize, because they look older, but they are in school. They are students. They're just like, put in charge of the other boys in the dorm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the one boy who gets sort of the one whip who gets like picked on among the other ones was really interesting, because he seems to be, I don't know, it seems like the other ones, they sort of wield their sexuality to just lord over the other boys, and they seem to be suggesting that he was actually like closeted, the one that they picked on, and it felt like he was kind of lashing out at Travis and the other boys kind of because of that, or they had, there was like a conflict between them because of that. And then later on, that you get the scene where he's ordered them to take cold showers, and he's in the bath and he's having this boy like bring him tea or whatever, and he makes Travis like stand in the shower for extra long, and it's, I don't know, I really liked it. I mean, it felt very real and kind of, traumatic, and like you're not gonna see that in a lot of other films, at least at that time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have this really cool book that has a bunch of old photos from like 100 years ago of men being very intimate with each other, very close to one another. You have to assume that most of them are just friends, but back in the day there was less of a shyness around, hugging and just having your arms around each other and being sweet. That's not what you'd think. We would have the thought today that back in the day, men were like strong and tried to put on like a hardened look about them. But I think it's the case that actually men were often very, very close with each other, if they were friends. And I think what happens is, in the cultural shift, there's like a fear that like sinks into culture. There's like a collective fear that happens, and it might have been like organized to some degree by people, or just something changes there when like society changes and it becomes more open to things. A certain other part of that society closes down. So I see these types of movies as like part of the reaction to the openness that has been occurring towards men who are gay or just curious in their younger years. Because yeah, it's just like you actually don't have that decades before this. It like becomes more of a thing around this time for guys to get like to put on a show and then like be nasty to each other for these reasons.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That like, as there is a like LGBT movement coalescing and people trying to advocate for better rights and making a point of being more visible and being more out in society, that you have that reaction against it. And conservatives kind of impulsively sort of policing themselves and each other for any actions, any attitudes that feel queer in any way. Yeah, I think it's sort of, it's like this unintended consequence almost. I mean, it's certainly not the fault of people advocating for themselves, but it's an unfortunate kind of reactionary shift that just happens. And I think you are seeing kind of the beginnings of that in a film like this.
Yeah, it's like these people who were trying to keep places like this structured and organized and keep the status quo. They can't. They're losing control. They're losing their power. You can see that happening. And this does a good job of illustrating that. Like, all these different types of people are kind of becoming a little more rebellious, a little more. Well, they're only rebellious because it's designed that way. Like, they're not necessarily, they wouldn't have been rebellious if they were allowed to be. If it was the case with the McDowell, if he was allowed to go out and stay out dancing or whatever it might be, ride his bike around, or in the case of somebody who's gay, just allow them to be gay. Like, they're not like, it's funny, it's not like they necessarily want to be rebellious. You have people who, so of course there's boys who are going to be rebellious no matter what, but a lot of the times that's the whole premise of the film in some sense. You're meant to empathize with these characters and wonder, wait, why are they rebellious? Yeah. Is it because they are rebellious by nature? Or is it because the structure kind of set them up to be rebellious? Because what other choice do they seemingly have?
Yeah. It's sort of an immovable object versus an unstoppable force. Like, for this structure to sort of justify itself, we have to make an example. We have to use discipline. We can't let these things go unchecked. But in disciplining that rebellion, you set those people apart and set them against the system. It just makes them want to rebel even more, to the point that, it reaches a breaking point at the end of this film. And that kind of hinges on the discipline scene when the three boys are getting like literally whipped in the gym. And it really reminded me of Nickel Boys, because McDowell's the last one, and it's kind of a long scene of him just waiting outside, listening to these sounds until he finally, is taken in there, and we actually see what's been happening when it's his turn. There's that really powerful shot of just like the back of his head after they're done hitting him, before he finally turns around, and he's got the like tears in his eyes, and he shakes the boy's hand as he's leaving.
Right, he says thank you.
Yeah. I mean, really powerful, and it's like, those boys probably think they've won, but it's like, this is, there's kind of no coming back from this. He hasn't been broken; he has been like radicalized in a sense,
Absolutely. Which we find out just how radicalized he became. Yeah, you can't. I mean, we know now you can't do that, and so I don't know how much they knew this then, but yeah, trying to prevent or correct violence with violence is for sure not going to work out. It's not going to work out. This is it's the funniest thing to watch in history. People try to do that, and it just continuously fails.
Yeah,
eye for eye. I don't know. These types of punitive measures just don't work, because it doesn't work, because, and you can see so clearly in this, like, these characters, they've barely been that violent. They're just kind of like, they're threatening in their act, they're threatening in their behavior and how they seem like they could be. And that makes sense. You're like trying to like organize a group of boys, and that's got to be tough, because boys are, very, when they get together, they can be very threatening at times with how they are. But if you try to correct that threatening behavior with force, oh man, it just never works out. Never works out. So we watch McDowell become radicalized, like you said, that we watch not only him, but the two other guys follow him even stronger. And it is interesting to see that what they decide to whip him intensely, more intensely than the other boys, and really take it out on them. That causes them to react even stronger. So they create the thing that they were trying to prevent in doing what they do. So yeah, you have this last scene, which to me, I mean, I got to be honest, I was surprised. I hadn't seen any photos of it either.
No, I might have. I mean, I didn't. It hadn't stuck in my head. I think I had seen like him holding a gun as an image, so I kind of maybe unconsciously had the idea that it was going there. But you have it's kind of two sections, right? Because before the very last scene, they have this like play skirmish, this like simulated shootout, which is very strange. And I'm not familiar enough with British schooling to know if this is normal, or even if this is like a military school, or if all boarding schools are military schools in Britain, or, you know, maybe this is just sort of symbolic that they're having this like military exercise where they go out into the field and shoot at each other, but they bring those real bullets to this and they start shooting at the headmaster, and, you know, he marches out towards them saying, "Give me that gun." And, you know, we had McDowell like takes the shot and it cuts to black or whatever. He's in the office after that, getting reprimanded, and the authority figure goes over to the drawer, and the headmaster's in the drawer, and I forget what he says. He's like, "You have to apologize to him," or something. I know we're like super off in surreal land now, but like, I don't know. It's a really interesting image, and it just kind of felt to me like it was saying, you know, you can shoot down a single figure, a single leader, but like it doesn't affect the structure itself. You know, like the school is going to keep going on. You know, the UK society, UK government's going to continue. Like, we just put this guy in a drawer and he's just a victim of this, you know, violence.
Yeah, to answer that question too that you just had, yeah, they did do those types of things after World War II. European countries, especially Britain, included in their education a kind of military training, junior training type of thing.
Well, how fascist can you get, man? Like,
yeah, I know. Well, I mean, that's the whole idea that's the whole thing with war, right? War is, it benefits a few people, and the rest are just pawns who are convinced and tricked into thinking that it was necessary the whole time for them, right? So you just can tell your whole populace, like, look, this bad thing happened, and in order to prevent that bad thing, you'll all have to now get trained. Sound good? And they'll all go, yeah, that makes sense. We should train. And without ever thinking, wait, why are we training and not you? And like, whoever put you in control. So anyways, yeah.
And the other thing, I almost missed this, was while all the boys are outside doing this exercise, the like head mistress, the one like woman teacher, whoever she is walking around the empty dorm naked. And I wasn't sure what to make of that exactly.
Yeah, how much of it is just the subconscious of a like you said, the guy who wrote it did so from his own perspective in a way. So how much of it is his subconscious, or just like meant to capture the subconscious of a boy in school?
Yeah, that does feel like a boy imagining that, you know, his female teacher, it really enjoys all of the attention from the students, and secretly she wants to walk around naked, and she'll take that opportunity when no one's there or something.
Yeah, it got surreal. It reminded me of, you haven't seen it yet, but Easy Rider does a similar thing.
Yeah, that was also at that 69 can with this film.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That'd be a great double feature of those two. Either those two or Clockwork. They're all kind of similar.
Yeah, and then we get that ending. And again, like, is this like a real ritual or graduation or whatever is happening? We do this like a cardinal. They're like guys in suits of armor, a general comes and talks. Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel a little overdone, but you get the sense that these are things that happen, and then you're kind of watching it from a young boy's perspective, just sort of like, what are we doing? Listening to all these old adults talk about ridiculous things. This guy talking to a group of high schoolers, right? Mm-hmm. And he's getting so amped up, he doesn't even notice that the building's on fire while people are storming out. I find that to be pretty real. Just this man who's so into what he's saying, he doesn't even recognize the world outside of him at all. Yeah. That's how out of touch he is. He's not talking to. I mean, and the other thing is he says the same thing every year. It's an impersonal kind of more indoctrination, and it's impersonal, and that because the building starts on fire and he's the last one to notice. But of course, the building started on fire not by accident, but on purpose, and it gets everybody to flee out the one exit, which they have surrounded with various guns and ammunition on the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, and they let rip onto the civilians and the teachers and the students below.
Yeah, we've gathered all of these, sort of symbolic figures of British culture, and now we're going to open fire on them and set,
That's the point that is the point. Who knows if those things really happen, but that is the point of the cardinal. I mean, it's just like it's like an English church boarding house or something, it feels like, right?
Yeah.
And so it has a lot of, like you said, archetypal.
Yeah. And again, it's like a feeling that was not expressed this overtly in film before, that the system is fucked, and we there's a want to burn it down, especially among young people, Mm-hmm. There's a feeling of just, we have to tear it down and start from scratch. And that's we're seeing that these things can happen if you try to make people conform so extremely that they're going to, those impulses are going to manifest into actual action, and again, this film coincided with so many events happening in '68. The big one being those student riots in France throughout the year. But there was civil rights marches in Northern Ireland earlier in '68 as well. I don't know what this Rivers of Blood speech is, but the MP in the UK at that time, Enoch Powell, gives this speech, I think, talking about why we need to keep people from protesting and rioting and stuff. All this stuff is in the air. Mm-hmm. And this film's interesting. This doesn't feel like a battle for Algiers or something. It doesn't feel like it's advocating for something. It feels like it is just trying to capture what it feels like to be a young person who's forced into this system. So in that way, it felt a little hollow to me at the end, because it is just a fantasy. In a lot of ways, things didn't change, at least not very radically, after there was so much unrest at the end of the 60s, a lot of things stayed the same, and we still deal with all kinds of bigotry and conservative movements. And now in this country, we're in a real bad way, Mm-hmm. But it feels so different when you're a young person and you're experiencing all this stuff for the first time, and it feels immediate. It feels like you have to act. You have to rebel against these things. I do feel, I don't think your politics become more conservative as you age, but I do think that in a sense you gain a perspective and you realize that you're not, the grand actor in history, and you're not going to change the world just because you decide that that's what needs to happen. I guess you get a little bit more perspective, I think, as you get older. on these things.
Yeah, it is. It's like, yeah, we live in a world where, I mean, where do we come from? We come from nature, and nature is pretty crazy. It can get really, really crazy out there. And I imagine most of history was full of like, this is my land, these are our resources. And you see that with groups of apes and chimpanzees and all sorts of stuff. So like, that's where we come from. And we've been trying to change things in the last 100 years or so. And it does feel like on some level, in some way, some things have gotten better in the last 100 years. But there's just a lot of greed. There's a lot of, there's always these power-grabbing individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels in a more nihilistic way like that's just baked into human nature because it's baked into nature. And then your only hope is that we can start figuring out how to actually achieve peace at some point, and that the general public can stop getting tricked by bullshit, because that's such a reoccurring historical phenomenon as well. Just because a guy in a suit with money says something doesn't make it true or right. In fact, a lot of times it's the opposite. And yet they trick us and they trick us and they trick us, and we fall for it, we fall for it, and we fall for it, and then we're back at war or whatever it is.
Yeah. And the phones, the way that so much of life is online and communities feel fragmented, make that a lot easier for people to kind of fall into those spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I really think that they do capture in this is this idea that the McDowell and his friends, they don't have a larger group to join. So he kind of goes his own way, and that's where you see these like school shooters who feel the same. They leave these manifestos that, kind of explain to the world that they spite everything. They spite God, they spite everything, and they think everything's trash, and so they decide to go take some people's lives and then their own. And that can only come from like this similar system that this film exposes and shows.
Yeah, I was going to bring up too, there's that earlier scene where they're in class with the teacher and he is trying to get them to join in a discussion about history, and I forget the exact things he says, but he's trying to say like, do we think that Britain is right or wrong in these certain ways? And they all just stare at him. They've been trained kind of by the sort of factory school system to not even engage with that sort of stuff. So they don't have the tools, in a sense, to build a kind of community the way that would be a lot more healthier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that teacher, if you gave him his own movie, that would have started to look a little bit like what was that we just said?
Young Poets.
Dead Poets Society. Yeah. I liked that little cut there. And that's a good observation. I didn't catch that the boys didn't really know what to say, because that is true. And that actually reminds me of like times when I was in high school and I'd get a teacher like that and they'd say something wild and I would look around the class and I'd be like, did y'all hear that? Nobody noticed. I'm like, what is going on here? The teacher just went nuts and you all missed that. It's like, oh man, that would get me so excited. And I literally would be like, one other person, please tell me you saw that. Please tell me you just heard that.
Yeah. And maybe it has always been like this, but I feel like, is it Socratic, the kind of the lecture style of teaching? I feel like that it's meant to be a dialogue. It's meant to get people engaged in ideas and conversations. And somehow along the way, the opposite result became the norm, that students feel like they're not supposed to speak up and they're just supposed to sit quietly and take notes. Mm-hmm. And it's like the purpose has been totally lost of why we teach this way, even. Or maybe not lost. It was sort of hijacked maybe by people that did want to raise up, obedient factory workers, laborers, whatever.
Right. I mean, it still is that way today to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The school system, it's the world's biggest, or maybe in this country, it's like the biggest ocean liner. Like you can, it's very hard to turn it around.
Man, we turn the tanker.
Yeah, but no, like it was certain teachers for me who took a personal interest and saw that I was engaging with certain things and handing me books and saying why don't you read this and think about this, and they were giving me stuff like this novel Ishmael that's like about a psychic gorilla teaching a guy how like capitalism kind of emerged out of agriculture and why we have a hierarchical society. I don't know, stuff that kind of changed how I looked at the world.
I remember that book.
Yeah. That's kind of what you need. You need adults to take an interest in what you're learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my grandmother gave me that book to read, and I didn't realize till a couple of years later that I think it's because she didn't really understand it, but she liked the title. But I really don't think that she understood it at all.
That's funny.
She's like, I think Zach will like this book. I'll give it to him.
I've got a little bit about Lindsay Anderson and kind of where he came from. Mm-hmm. Do we have any more specific film thoughts before?
Well, last thought would be, I'm just curious, did you ever see Gus Van Sant's Elephant?
No.
Yeah.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing to say about that is like, and I think this is widely known, and it's not that it doesn't take away from the film, but there's no explanation in that film. There's no manifesto that you're given, and the point of that is to say that here in this film they're like trying. It's like they're like seeing the future before it happens. They're like, wait, if we keep doing this is what's going to happen. And it might have felt crazy at the time, but look at it happened. And with Elephant, what he does is he's like, oh, now it's happening, and it feels normal. So there's no explanation, and the scariest part of that movie is like a lot of it, aside from the actual shooting, it's like just a typical day, just normal day, normal kids, and then they shoot up, and you're like, what the heck is going on here? It's extremely horrifying and terrifying as a movie, but that is the trajectory I see. I see it going from movies like this that have like theory and a bit of like explanation and a bit of like kind of like the title itself, like if this keeps happening, then this will happen, and then you have like today you would just have a movie there's no explanation. So I just find that ending to be not incredibly well done in the film as it's not incredibly well done as it is in film. And I think the 70s get crazy and they do that type of thing, but I do think it's like crazy foreshadowing for sure.
Yeah, it just kind of becomes almost commonplace for your film to sort of end with a massacre or a shootout or something. It made me think of this film Little Murders that Alan Arkin directs, which kind of has the same sort of social commentary about, shooters and stuff. And a lot of this came out of those like assassinations that happened in the 60s, JFK and Martin Luther King Jr., all these things, the Zapruder film, people getting really used to this happening. And it became something that was reflected in media in a very widespread way. But no, it's Lindsay Anderson. I mean, he's thinking about the working class and young people, normal people in Britain, because he is one of these guys that came up as a film critic with a similar story to the Cahiers du Cinema crowd. He eventually got to go write at Sight and Sound, and his most famous article is called Stand Up, Stand Up, and it is decrying the British cinema of the time for being very upper middle class, and being very sort of disconnected from normal people's lives. So he and a couple other filmmakers started this series they called Free Cinema, where they just started showing their like low budget documentaries of normal people and normal events. His first one is called Oh Dreamland, which was just like an amusement park that he, made a documentary of. And it's kind of in a sort of poetic tradition. It doesn't really follow, one subject or something, but they're kind of pulling it. And this was in the mid 50s. This was in 56. They started these free cinema screenings, and they're kind of pulling from neorealism and other, British documentary tradition, and trying to say, like, films are too worried about making money and appeasing a wide audience, and we need to try to change that in some way. And later on, he would kind of express that he felt like they failed in being able to do that. Some of those guys that were associated with that become the sort of kitchen sink filmmakers, Tony Richardson and Carol Rice, or Wrights. Some of those guys that direct stuff like Look Back in Anger and Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, and A Taste of Honey. I think you watched that one, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Stuff that was very new and focused on like working class and stuff, but it was not, in the sense that didn't last very long. And those guys, pretty much all of them went to go to Hollywood in the late 60s. And, this focus that Lindsay Anderson was very concerned about of normal British people became not the focus anymore for them. And it sort of, it wasn't a movement. It was these guys finding their way to being able to have this consistent, successful careers. So he always kind of felt apart from them. He stayed in Britain and didn't direct a lot of films. He makes a couple sort of spiritual sequels to this film, actually, with Malcolm McDowell, where he plays the same character, and there's not really a lot of similarity, but it follows Mick Travis through various kind of like satirical British events. But yeah, it's funny. I watched this segment that he did for television in the 80s, Lindsay Anderson, talking about the free cinema movement, and just saying, like, we wanted film to mean something and for it to express something that people related to, and he felt like they got away from that, and he felt like in the 80s Britain was getting even further away from that these guys were off making stuff that was winning Oscars, Chariots of Fire and stuff like that, and the sort of British tradition that he wanted to foster in their cinema didn't happen. That's how he felt.
Yeah, I love that they did that, and they tried to do that, and it's always good to see. I think that the influence that can have, sometimes not obvious, but yeah, then people go on to make other films and they change the way they do it. But there'll always be like there's an impact, like it's remembered, and other people will look back at that and appreciate that moment. And
yeah.
I do think about this idea of films being like relatable, so like super relatable, and sometimes it's hard. Like if you want to make films like that, like it's a very specific audience, that will want to watch that. I think people like to forget about their own lives when they go to see something like a film.
Yeah.
But of course, there should be art made about the lower class, middle class. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's like we talked about last episode, that it is really important to support all kinds of cinema, and for, that to be a public good that we put money into. And that happens in the UK and in France, but that's never been something that we do here, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. No, here it's an all-out fight. It's an all-out fight. It's the Wild West.
And his first, I think this was his first feature film, sounds really interesting. It'd be interesting to watch. It's called This Sporting Life, and it's kind of a biopic about this star rugby player who was basically exploited by, his team owners and team managers, that he was getting injured and not making a lot of money while they were getting rich off of his stardom. And that was very much in that kitchen sink sort of realist mode. So I would like to watch that at some point.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And that's rugby?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Is this his most well-known film, If?
Yes, definitely. This got 5 or 6 votes on Sight and Sound, most recent one. He even got a couple votes on his short film that they showed at that first free cinema screening. in the next time in 62.
Wow.
Which I guess, it's the BFI Sight and Sound list, and he was a writer there, so people would be aware of him.
That's right.
But
you'd think you almost think you'd get more because of that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's someone who's kind of off to the side. He is not a super well known or revered filmmaker, it would seem. But this was a pretty terrifically made film. It's not like a favorite for me. I didn't walk away from this feeling like, oh, this is just an absolute classic. But it's really, really well made. And I love how unique it is, at least for the time, So it was cool. I'm glad that we decided to watch this, talk about it.
Yeah, same. No, I think I feel the same, but there's also a part of me that wants to be like, oh, fuck it, and just give it 5 stars just for the hell of it. Just because I thought that it was like, I think that it's a film that should be remembered more. I think it should be have a little more attention than it's given. Because even though it's not incredible, like you said, it's still very, very interesting and worth having a little more acknowledgement. So,
yeah. I felt like we kept kind of teasing out more ideas. There's stuff to get out of this for sure.
Yeah, that's how it is. And then from here, we traveled to Italy.
Yes.
Pasolini.
We have not talked about a Pier Paolo Pasolini film yet, but we're going to talk about Theorem.
We're going to see. We both have seen the Gospel According to Matthew, and I think that's it. That's the only...
Yeah, I went back and watched his debut, Acatone.
Okay.
Very good film. But from there he launches off into doing some very strange and interesting things. So I don't know what to expect for this.
Gospel According to Matthew, another film that uses African music in its soundtrack to elicit a certain kind of energy. So looking forward to seeing what he does with Theorem and talking about that next week. If anybody has questions or comments or wants to go and see what else we've done, go to unauthorizedpod.com. And I think that's it.
Yeah. All right. Till next time.
Peace.
Peace.